Why is the New York Times urging America to buddy up with communist China? Great question, right? Why is the New York Times caping for the communist Chinese party? They're probably bought and paid for, just like the Biden administration, just like a lot of our politicians and government are bought and paid for by the CCP. But before we get started, go ahead and hit that like button. Share this out so we can get this information out there. Subscribe if you're not already a subscriber and hit that alarm bell so you know when I'm putting out new stuff. Also, check out my link tree in the description. Has a link to my Patreon where I talk about things I can't talk about here. There's also a link to my Instagram and my merch store where I have I Will Not Comply t-shirts as well. So check those out as well. All right, let's talk about this news. The New York Times editorial board published a piece last weekend that shows a worrying bias for America's greatest foe, the Chinese Communist Party. Even some conservatives that I listen to are downplaying the CCP. They don't really think it's a big deal. They think people like myself are making a big deal out of it, but I think people aren't making enough of a big deal about what's going on with the CCP in relation to our country and our constitution and our laws. And all you have to do is just look at ESG and the DEI stuff that's going on that originated from the CCP, and you can see that they are definitely a issue in our country. But the piece titled "Who Benefits from Confrontation with China" is a masterclass in misdirection and falsehood. Uh, if it were not published in America's so-called paper of record, it would be just as at home in China Daily, arguing that Americans must avoid a quote glib and quote misguided Cold War narrative. The editorial seeks a policy of quote emphasizing competition with China while minimizing confrontation. The line mimics CCP agitprop and ignores geopolitical realities. The editorial board frames the rising tension between China and the United States as primarily the fault of American politicians, particularly the Republican Party, who are hyperbolizing the danger from the CCP. And I don't think they're making enough of an issue with what's going on. But in reality, the U.S. has been far too soft on China throughout the 21st century, with each presidential administration doing its part. Former President George W. Bush brought China into the World Trade Organization. Former President Barack Obama studiously avoided conflict with the CCP. Former President Donald Trump put trade pressure on Beijing while simultaneously praising Chinese President Xi Jinping's life tenure. And President Joe Biden, his son Hunter Biden, and his family have financial ties to the Chinese regime. Despite 2 decades of favorable or neutral treatment, China has consistently provoked and um, aggra- aggravated its neighbors and the U.S. led world order. China has militarized the South China Sea and international waterway. It has used civilian fishing fleets as cover for military actions. It has waged brutal battles against Indian soldiers for control of disputed territory high in the Himalayas. It has at best covered up the origins of COVID-19 pandemic and at worst deliberately released it from a virology lab. And most recently, it floated a spy balloon across the entirety of the continental United States, including our sensitive military sites. This is no, this is not mere friendly competition. Again, even people on the conservative side are downplaying this. I'll be having conversations with, but the editorial uses various tropes commonplace among CCP apologists, all meant to downplay or excuse the malign actions of the Chinese government and shift the narrative in Beijing's favor. First, the editorial board claims the U.S. must reduce tensions with China because the relationship economically benefits both countries. But the United States does not benefit like China does. China abuses its economic power to stifle competition, promotes the digital fentanyl of TikTok to America's youth, and steals important intellectual property, most often in the military realm. The New York Times owned magazine published an incredible expose on Chinese government industrial espionage only a few days before this major editorial. Second, the editors mentioned that the U.S. needs China to combat climate change or else the whole planet is doomed. Setting climate change science aside, they presume Beijing will act in good faith. China has massively accelerated its construction and use of coal-fired power plants, a fuel source that activists, including Swedish truant Greta Thunberg, protest against in nations like Germany. The editorial board has previously exonerated Republicans for not doing enough on climate while ignoring China's actions. Third, the editors argue that China continues to show strikingly little interest in persuading other nations to adopt the social and political views. They claim then that China is not a threat on par with the Soviet Union. But Xi has consistently sought to export the China model, or the China way is what I call it, abroad, specifically stating as much in official communiques. American experts, including Elizabeth Economy of the Council of Foreign Relations, have proven that China exports its ideology. Budding authoritarians the world over salivate at the totalitarian information control that the CCP experts at home, while still advancing the basic standard of living to four-star popular revolt. I mean, they have so much control over their people, and that's what they want here in our country. Again, that's what the ESG is about. That's what DEI is about. That's what this woke ideology is all about. Fourth, the editorial board claims that the anti-American sentiment does not unite Chinese political leaders. This is a page torn right from the old pro-Iran playbook in the purported split between moderates and hardliners. As with Iran, the dichotomy does not apply to China. Xi's increasingly personal rule has cemented that fact. Just before the editorial's publication, Xi has given a third term as Chinese dictator, effectively making him ruler for life. The vote was a foregone conclusion, as were the appointments of his allies to all key positions of China's government. There are no moderates in charge of China, and the New York Times would do well to note that. I mean, just remember when they hauled that guy off, and just hauled him off, and we haven't heard from him again. People just disappeared. Opponents just disappear in China. Look at what happened to what's the name? Jack Ma, billionaire. Still haven't heard from this guy after he spoke out against Xi Jinping. The editorial board fifth and last pro-engagement argument is that the U.S. cannot, quote, pull back from forums where it has long engaged China, such as World Trade Organization, which I believe we should get out. I believe we need to get out of that. The editors oddly picked the international institution that China has most abused. It has ignored or deliberately broken WTO rules from day one by continuing prohibited policies and refusing to comply with judgments of trade courts. China has also captured the World Health Organization, which failed to investigate COVID-19's origins. American politicians are finally seeing the CCP's threat to the U.S., but the New York Times views the growing bipartisan consensus on opposing China as the provocation. This purposeful reversal of calls Chinese malfeasance and affect the building bipartisan consensus on China follows CCP propaganda and aims at turning U.S. policy and public opinion towards a non-confrontational posture. The editorial board's pro-CCP bias has many causes, but most revolve around profit. For years, the New York Times took money from the Chinese government to run more than 200 propaganda advertorials. The New York Times scrubbed those puff pieces from its website in 2020. The articles reached millions of Americans. The immoral editorials did not drive the paper's profit, though the CCP paid several hundreds of thousands of dollars for them. The key profit motive, subscriber revenue, reinforces the pro-CCP bias. The New York Times maintains and grows its subscriber base by appealing to the professional managerial class, and that class has the most direct and intricate economic links to China. They would lose the most from an escalation or decoupling, so the editorial board defends the status quo and thus its readership bias. I mean, common sense, that's exactly what they're doing. But unlike the New York Times, the American people are rejecting China as a partner and seeing it as a danger that it is. Since 2020, American public opinion on China has drastically shifted in a negative direction, with most people in both parties viewing Beijing as a threat instead of a partner. Congress has begun to reflect these concerns with the establishment of the House of China Committee and efforts to counter the CCP influence. The American people and their representatives has woken up to the Chinese challenge. It is far beyond time we reject the naive idea of engagement with China and the New York Times editorial board with it. But let me know what you think. Leave your comments down below. Like, share, subscribe, and check out democrepublics.com for the latest in news. Until next time, peace.